Welcome everybody to the show. I just realized that the microphone was like right here, and that was going to make for a really bad content. So we are, making some changes and adjustments here at Ardwulf Lair. So I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for stopping by. We are clipping once again Western Front, the including the Schlieffen plan. That's just like one component in the whole thing. What is a very large 6 counter sheet package, and we're going to be doing this for probably the next couple of weeks. But I am making progress because we'll talk about why in a minute. We are drinking the Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve. This does not have an age statement, so it is good, and you can definitely get some rum and actually wine character out of it. But it is bottled at 40%, which means it is not a truly high-end, amazing scotch, in my opinion. And it's not because it doesn't have enough alcohol in it. It's like I don't drink enough of it for that to be a factor anyway. Tonight we're talking about unplayed classics. So what we mean by that is the classic war games that we have not played. And I have my list of 25. There might actually be 26 in the list that I will nominate and promise to play at least one of them in 2023, which I think that may already be on the schedule, so we may actually get more than one done. That would be great if we do. So before we get started, there's like a whole bunch of stuff to talk about here. So, and none of it is about Wizards of the Coast. Go watch the short if you want my opinion on that. So follow me on social media. I'm on all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram. It's all down in the video description. There's a Discord server for Ardwulf's Lair, which has started to pick up quite a bit since I started doing this weekly link thing. There's a link to that in the ticker, which I will put up right now. That's a good reminder to put the ticker up. We are over on Mastodon as well for those who are interested in that. And there is so Mastodon is like server based, so you don't have like one global server, but all the servers can talk to each other. And there is a tabletop wargaming Mastodon server, which is awesome. So check that out. If anybody wants that information, my email address is in the ticker as well. So before we, before we do the other stuff, don't forget, we'll talk about why in a minute. It would be great if folks could help support Ardwulf's Lair through the various ways to do that. Super chats and super stickers are on. That's not only a way to support the channel, but it's a way to get your comment highlighted so I don't miss it, which is is I'm increasingly likely to do as age encroaches here. And also there was something else that I wanted to. We'll get to it. Like I said, there's a lot to talk about. But before we do that, let's say a welcome to Alan Salazar, Alistair Logie, Andrew Frankie, Board Gaming Geezer, Bob Moriarty, Brian, Chad Canetti, Dale Brady, Daniel Silverthorne, Daniel Teets, Daryl Lundy, Dicey Odds. Welcome to the stream. I think you've been here before, but I may or may not have remembered. Eric Hansen, Findle70, GWG Gaming with Garavalia, Iggy Cricktal, the legend himself, Fucko is here. James Whitmer, Jason W., Jason Williams, Jeff Anderson, Jeffrey Edwards, John Stanley, John Clark, Kilroy of Kilroy was here, is here. Lee Grant Manders, Mark McNair, Matt Taylor, Meandering Mike, Mike Burnett, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, to whom you should all be subscribed, Rob Moffat, Strelnikoff, Tim Zales, Tom MC, William Aarons, and William Bird. I apologize if I have missed anyone, but we have limited tools at our disposal here, which I am now going to close said limited tools. Jeff Beeler asks if I've done an open box on Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit number 2. I'm not sure I did number 2. I did number 1 and I did number 4. I would actually have to check that because we are at the point where, thanks to encroaching age, I have filmed a second unboxing of something and it got loose and I felt dumb. So that is a thing that can happen. So when we say classics in the context of tonight, I am focusing on older games. So everything that I have on my list is from the 70s or the 80s. So that might not be true. There might be a couple things, 1 or 2 things from the 90s on there too. But hell, that stuff's 30 years old. So John C. from the sunny Philippines. YouTube didn't tell me you were here. So it is YouTube's fault that we have messed that up. I apologize. Joe Okabayashi, I know we didn't get you either. So I will try to say hello to people as you pipe up in the chat. So Let's talk about the rather eventful weekend that we had here at Ardwulf's Lair, where we had a storm that blew through. And here's what happened: an entire tree fell on my car and flattened the shed as well. So I've got some pictures of this taken for insurance. The tree's about, I don't know if you could tell from here, but the tree's about 14 inches across. It's apparently an ash that was previously dead thanks to the emerald ash borer, which I guess I knew about, but I didn't know we had dead trees here. So that's a problem. Here is where it stands right now, other than covered in 4 or 5 inches of snow, which has come down in the last 48 hours. So the tree came down, bounced off the car, and kind of flattened the shed as well. Um, Frankly, the car is probably a complete write-off, to be honest. So yes, no injuries. Everybody was fine. Although I was like out in the driveway when this happened, in the other sitting in the other car, which is fortunately about 40 feet away. Um, and I heard it crack. I heard the cracking, and I'm like, I look up, and I'm like, the tree falls, bounces off the car, rolls into the shed, totals both. We did manage to extract. No, we were not John C. No games were stored in that shed. The only things in there was like garden stuff. So some of that stuff's not cheap, but Jed Kennedy says we'll buff it out. The none Some of that stuff wasn't particularly cheap, but none of it's pretty far from irreplaceable, right? The most expensive thing in that shed was probably worth about a third of a case blue. So I think we're going to be okay. And the important thing, obviously, is nobody was out there in sitting in that car. It's not like I never sit in that car. 'Cause we don't smoke in the house. The weather sucks, so we're smoking in the car, and I've smoked in that car before. And yes, we won't be doing that. I had been saying for years that I'm going to drive this car until the end. Well, looks like we've hit the end. The insurance people are coming out tomorrow, which is an annoying delay considering this happened on Thursday night. But the car is looking like a total write off, and I expect to get very little out of it considering it's a 15 or 16-year-old car that um, has roughly 160,000 miles on it. No, so we have two sheds. The mower was in the other shed. So that would have been a $2,000 replacement at least. And that shed, fortunately, is a bit more structurally sound than this metal shed was anyway. Uh, I'm working from home for the rest of the week, and I'll go into the office next week. So obviously, the universe is clearly telling me smoking is a bad idea. But thank goodness I was wearing my brown pants, is what I'm telling people. So this all sucks. Currently feuding with the insurance company to get them to actually cover anything. Auto insurance is probably not a problem, but like I said, with the deductible, they're not going to probably. We'll see what they say, but I don't truthfully expect them to give me much more than the deductible. So yeah, I mean, I've been driving this car for years. It had been parked in the driveway for a few weeks because I was taking the other car to work. But and fortunately, there's a second vehicle, so we're not like totally hosed. Worst case scenario, nobody covers anything, and sometime around in a few months, we'll start looking at other cars, which is a thing that we were going to do anyway, and this just kind of accelerates that plan. And as I mentioned, I have another shed. So being out a shed is not the end of the world. Cars are indeed fairly expensive. So yeah, I'm not feeling really warm and fuzzy about the insurance company at this time. In happier news, here's the first game that we've managed to create and store create 3D printed trays to store the pieces in. This is Sicily Triumph and Folly, also known as Sicily One. I'm very happy with this solution. It requires both the trays and a set of spacers, which I then had to kind of figure out, because if here's one of the trays for Devel Krieg, and you can shake this all you want, because the counters have spacers in them, they're not going to flop around in the stacks that are higher than half an inch. So that was going to be a problem otherwise. So, but the spacers are working really good. So I have had I've been getting asked a lot, how can I get these trays? There'll be some way to get these trays at some point in the future. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that yet. I don't think me printing and selling them is practical. I'm kind of trying to think about that, but this tray, I'll tell you because I've calculated this. This tray, which has 48 compartments, would sell for about $20. And that's based on the cost of the material, which is pretty low, and the cost of the runtime on the machine, which is pretty high. Yes, I know you're going to need these trays, so you may get some free trays because I got a large stack of prototypes that there's nothing wrong with, but there is also some that there are some stuff wrong with, and those went in a recycling hopper. But they're working really good. They are obviously intended for use with tweezers. I'll do a separate video on that at some point so that we don't have to clutter this show up with 3D printing stuff. So let's move on. And before we go over to that, let me hop over to the other screen because we have a GMT update to talk about, the January 19th GMT update. So we're going to buzz through this pretty fast, I think. As usual, go on to GMT's website and read this whole thing if you want to read the whole thing, because I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to hit the highlights. So CSR award winners include Atlantic Chase Bandits and Tomahawks, Red Flag over Paris, and Storm over the Reich. So congratulations to all those folks. Away Team has garnered 1,500 pre-orders in just 2 months. That's John Butterfield's thematic sequel to the Pandora games from SPI. Looks pretty neat. I haven't ordered it yet just because now seems like a bad idea to pre-order stuff. We'll get to Seljuk in a minute, and we'll have an interview with Justin as well. I'll talk about that also in a minute. But I haven't pre-ordered Away Team yet, just because it's like I don't want to spend the money on this right now. But I'm almost certain to get that. That sounds pretty cool. So I mean, I was could prepare to drive this thing for another couple of years had it worked, but yes, we're not. Commands and Colors Napoleonics being repackaged. We already talked about that. New print and play variant for Red Flag over Paris. Tracks for Grand Prix, which I don't care about. The Barracks Emperors, which looks very abstract. Ray Farrell is one of the designers, though, and he's done very good work in the past. So that's worth at least a look. Cuba Libre tournament, new Vassal mods, designer interviews from a bunch of different people, including Dan the Dancing Man, and pretty sharp looking Banish the Snakes t-shirts, I gotta say, too, by the way. Okay, new P500s. There's where we get to the good stuff. Next War Iran. I think it was not a secret that this was coming, but here it is on P500. This is what you think it is, the Mitchell Land Next War series. This is kind of I think the premier series right now for near future conflicts that are like in our near future as opposed to near future for 1980. Nothing wrong with those, but that's I want to kind of put those in a separate category personally, not for Charles S. Robert purposes. Next up is Seljuk, Byzantium Besieged. This is by Justin Facino, the designer. You and the rest of us on YouTube may know him better as Justiguard. We have an interview with Justin lined up, and Justin might be the only YouTuber I've met in person. I'm not sure that's true, but it might be. He's a nice young man, and we'll be having an interview with him about Seljuk, which apparently brings some new stuff to the Levian campaign scene. So have a look at that if you're interested in the Levian campaign. And bear in mind, that's true. I've met Mo, and I'm being a douche by forgetting that. Mo feels like somebody that I know outside of YouTube, though, to be honest. So and that's my excuse. So that's because I've met Mo multiple times actually, and have had a lot of conversation with Mo, and Mo's great. Mo, I love you. I'm sorry for leaving you out. So, and Next War supplement number 4, which sounds like it's going to be mostly scenarios and additional supplemental materials for all the Next War games as usual. So for the Next War aficionados, by the way, there's a lot of friggin' French in this game. So we'll be printing the French tray tonight, and it won't be ready until Wednesday. So that is how that is going to shake out. So, and let's hope that that particular tray comes out okay, because otherwise that's a lot of time wasted. So I would imagine that, as usual, next to our supplement number 4, we'll have the materials available for download for free, and you order the supplement if you want the professionally printed version of those. I've got all of the next war stuff, except the last supplement, number 3, and these 2 new things that aren't out yet. So I am certain to buy those. Those are on our list of things we want to play. It's just that they haven't been at the top of the list of things we want to play. So, um, all right. Next up is we've already talked about the new P500 editions. There is a removal World War II Barbarossa to Berlin, but apparently designer Ted Racer is thinking about doing some updates to the game, so it may be back. And I would not be shocked should that occur. It is a point-to-point World War II game, which is a little unusual for a World War II game, but the people who have played it have had really good things to say about it. Napoleon in Egypt hasn't, last I checked, has not made the cut, and that actually does look pretty cool. And that is a pretty interesting Napoleonic campaign, actually. Not necessarily for reasons that would be captured in a point-to-point war game, but I'm very curious to see and learn more about Napoleon in Egypt. Candace Harris teaches you how to play dominant species marine. Other goodies from GMT here. Inferno should be out and should be in my hands relatively shortly. We're scrolling to find the charging and shipping update. All right. They started shipping Banish the Snakes Inferno and the deluxe edition of Russian Campaign 5th edition for those of who've been waiting for that for however long it's been. It's been a long time. Um, uh, Next charges will be for Battle of White Plains, which I am on the hook for. Clash of Sovereigns, which I should probably order. I believe that is the War of the Austrian Succession, which is a very interesting topic. Paths of Glory, second printing, which I uh Paths of Glory Deluxe. So the recent edition of the last printing of it, uh new map art, and it included the extra cards that were in the player's guide at one point. So while I don't plan to order this, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to end up wanting this because it's Paths of Glory is a game I like a lot and I would like to get back to it at some point. Sekigahara 5th printing, so that's doing okay. Last 100 Yards Volume 1 second printing. Now, if we go down to the statuses, in the warehouse by late this month to be the 5 things that I just mentioned. At sea, expected in February, include Ancient Civilizations of the Middle East, Atlantic Chase second printing, and Grand Prix new track pack, which I do not care about, and apparently GMT doesn't either because there's no link here. Now, the things that have moved up, Mr. President and People Power have gone to the printer. Mr. President is long awaited for a long time and actually does look fairly neat. People Power is a coin game about the insurgency in the Philippines, which is topically cool. The cover has been released. We might actually see it here. And the cover has been very divisive. So it's one of those. We'll see if we come to it in the update. I'll show it to you and have comment. Going to the printer this month, Liberty or Death, third printing, and the Barracks Emperors. And things that moved into final art and proofing include Plantagenet, another Levian campaign game, Pursuit of Glory, second edition, which I actually do intend to get and really should actually order. Skies Above the Reich, second printing, The Plum Island Horror from our friend Herman Lutman, and Under the Southern Cross. Now, a couple of interesting things here. I've recently been informed that there may be some guest stars that you recognize in the Plum Island Horror. So check that out when it comes out. Under the Southern Cross is a Flying Colors series games about the South American wars in the Age of Sail, which is actually a pretty interesting thing too. And I have not ordered that, but I really need that. So, and then nothing has been added to the art department, but nearing art department readiness is Away Team Voyages of the Pandora. And we've got a bunch of links to our favorite content creators and some that we don't like. Here's I'm being facetious here, folks. Plantagenet, this is another by Francisco Gradial. This is another Levian campaign game. My voice is just not doing good. That's why I made sure I had a glass of water down here too. So Plantagenet looks pretty cool. Fred Serval's new game, A Guest of Robin Hood, a Jest of, I don't know, however you pronounce that. This was explained to me before and I forgot it. Here's the cover to the Barracks Emperors. Um, I'll be honest, I don't like the cover here. I don't like the art, actually. I think it looks like the art from a Talbot Mundy paperback. It's not bad. I just don't think it tonally works. The font up at the top is pretty much fine. Here's some stuff from Tanto Manta, which we've seen before. Here's the track pack, which I'm going to buzz past. If you really want to look at it, go look at it on GMT's website. Panzer North Africa, which people have been waiting for a while. Reprint tracking. We're not going through this. So I guess we don't get to see the people power thing because I'm not going to go run it down. So let me close this off, and we're going to get to the one last personal bit of news. And then we'll get into the Unplayed classics. So thanks everybody for putting up with me until now. Let me pull up you can only like queue up one shared screen at a time, which is a little bit annoying. So right behind that door is the game room. Okay. And kind of a priority, and there's like like an actual timetable on this because there's a couch and a love seat upstairs in the living room. There's another couch on its way, expected to be here around sometime next month. When it arrives, there aren't room for two couches and a love seat, plus two recliners in that room. So the love seat is coming down here outside the game room. And where it's going is the wall against which I have had all the still boxed games stacked. Now, I think there's no war games in there. I think the war games are all unpacked, and that's all like RPGs and miscellaneous things. But I could be wrong. And in fact, I found some stuff unpacked in some boxes yesterday. So, in the sense of, hey, let's get this thing done finally, I actually have started putting up shelves. This is approximately these 4 shelves that you see are 40% of the whole wall, which you'll have pictures of at some point soon. This is a question that I think is a legitimate question to ask. If that is the topological case with a point-to-point map, why not use hexes? Then again, you might end up finding that hexes look bad, so, and that's a legitimate reason to not do that. Yeah, Jim, the Tross of Samothrace covers are the ones I'm thinking of specifically. Interesting pulp fiction set in the Roman era and not super fantastical at that. Some shelves are up. So at the top you see Avalon Hill. It's the only company that's like going to get its own section, and that's because their boxes are in a different size than everybody else's. And they fit based on the way the spacing works. The next shelf down is Ancients, that contains all the Ancients. And a few Napoleonics things, and the next shelf down is Napoleonics, and it is stuffed, and in fact is overflowing upwards onto Ancients. Thank you, Jim, for whom I blame this tragedy. And then the bottom shelf is Civil War. Now, I still, there's still going to be some arranging here. For example, I pulled out like the dedicated solitaire games. Field Commander Napoleon, there's going to be in like a shelf where there's solitaire stuff, for example. The other half of the wall was intended to be RPGs. It's probably actually going to be mostly war games, but I think I'm also going to put the Traveler out there. Depends what I can fit. We will see how that works. So these are actually 25 or 26 unplayed classics that I think are classics, and we'll talk about why I think they're classics. And I'd be curious to know what you folks think are your unplayed classics that you really probably ought to try to get played at some point. These are in, unusually for this format, alphabetical order. So, which I think I probably didn't screw up, but I might be deluding myself as well. So, without further ado, April's Harvest. This is one from the 90s, actually, and actually might be the most recently released game on this list. I didn't look the dates up on these. I want to say this was like 1992. This is one of the very first releases from the gamers, and it's about the Battle of Shiloh. It's not that early a release from the gamers, actually. I'm wrong about that. I'm thinking of In Their Quiet Fields, which is Antietam. So I want to get to play a Civil War Brigade series game. Now I've played Line of Battle, and there's a lot of similarities, but I kind of want to play a CWB game to get that wardrobe from the Wardrobe Plays World War II channel, or as Dan says, Wardy Robe for some reason. So go subscribe to his channel. He's doing good stuff too. But and as is Jim Ozarski, I have to mention that. And Dan the Dancing Man has joined us this evening. Thank you, Dan, for stopping by. So I want to play a CWB game, and it's going to be this one because this is the one I have. So I will defer further investments in the CWB series until I have played at least this one. And I think my natural place in the American Civil War Tactical is at the regimental level, which is more detailed. This is at the brigade level, obviously. So and I'm already sold on Line of Battle. Plus Great Battles of the American Civil War, plus Blind Swords. So I got more than enough to pick from. The Blind Swords group, the folks doing development for that are doing a lot of interesting battles that have not traditionally gotten a lot of coverage. John C., yes, this is the one where you have to write the orders. That's the case in Line of Battle as well. It's technically optional, but I really feel like you're missing a key element of the system if you do not use the written orders. So I would always use the written orders. Now, when these came out, I was like, "Ooh, that's weird. I feel weird about that. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." The same thing with the track and supply points and the op sheets from OCS and TCS. And now I think those are really, really cool and interesting elements that have not really seen a lot of adoption outside of these series for some reason. Now, one might say that they're burdensome elements, but I think they add a lot of verisimilitude to like have to write your orders out. Say, hey, go take this point, or march until you meet up with blah 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 blah, blah unit. I think that's really neat. So, um, I mean, this is tactical too. It's just less tactical, right? So let's talk about Into the Woods, which is regimental level as a Great Battles of the American Civil War game. It's more directly comparable to Line of Battle than it is to this. So, well, maybe Russian Campaign and Wilderness War are on here, and so that's my other criteria for this. And I actually have a separate list, which I don't know that I have enough of these to make a whole show out of. But there's also a separate list of classics that I played back in the day that I want to play again at some point. And 1776 is on that list, actually. Well, I know Stigler feels that Into the Woods is much better than Bloody April, and I am prepared to believe him on that count. But I also got to figure out how to organize my Into the Woods, which I haven't touched yet. So I did get, by the way, I haven't done a video on this yet because they arrived at just an absolutely horrific time. I did get some of the Cube for Me trays from Poland, which took a lot less time than you'd expect, and the shipping cost was not that high. And they're pretty neat trays, and the interesting thing about them is that they have a variety of different configurations and thicknesses and stuff like that, so you can kind of customize your storage solution. That said, I still don't think that storage solution is going to work for Pacific War in such a way as to maximize setup or minimize setup time. Well, not without like picking a specific scenario that you're going to all set up. So April's Harvest is on the list. It's the CWB entry on this list. Next up from Avalon, and almost all of these are from Avalon Hill or SPI with a couple exceptions. So, and we'll get to those exceptions when they arise. So, one of the things about the written orders is it's like it's a deanism, right? Dean's got something to say in the design, and that's good as a designer, as somebody that has followed his designs. I want to hear what he has to say, right? And he's one of the big ways in which he does that in that particular series is through that written orders system. So, and Stigler says Richard Berg personally tasked Dick Whitaker with improving Bloody April as a condition of buying the franchise. Yeah, like I said, it's without having. I mean, I've played the system. We're going to get to classic GBACW in just a minute here, actually. I have reason to think that I will personally end up preferring the modern incarnation rather than the SPI incarnation. But again, we will get to that when we get to it. Air Assault on Crete, which we have hardly even mentioned. This is, of course, an Avalon Hill game. I want to say it's Advanced von Voorhees design. Am I misremembering that? Maybe not. Somebody will tell me if I am. So Jeff Beeler, this is true, but the format for the orders is different. You actually like draw what you're doing out on a map called an op sheet. So while it is the same idea, the implementation is significantly different. I think. So, and you might have, reasonable command control problems, right? In your, so and so didn't get the order, or so and so got the order, but he's not sure how to interpret it, and there's a delay, and all of those things which happened in Civil War battles are modeled in that system. I don't have a ton to say about Air Assault on Crete, but it is a classic. There's two games in here. The Invasion of Malta game is bundled with it as well, so that's kind of a bonus. But this is a game that's really well regarded, and I would like to check it out at some point. There is a top 5 on this list, but I'll tell you what the top 5 are at the end. This is not in the top 5, but it's something I'd like to try out. It's also one that I do not have, and I'll try to remember to point those out too. Obviously, April's Harvest I've got. The next one is Atlantic Wall. Now, this is the classic Joe Balkowski Atlantic Wall and not the new Atlantic Wall from Decision, which is a very different game. There are some underlying structures that are similar, where you could kind of see how Joe Youst took the Joe Balkowski system as a starting point and basically rebuilt from the ground up. But they're when you look at the games, they're not obviously simple. I would call Air Assault on Crete a classic. It's well regarded. Um, Atlantic Wall, it's a classic. This is not necessarily to say these are the most awesome games. Okay, these are the games that interest me, and I'm interested in hearing the games that interest you folks too. So, Atlantic Walls, it's pretty neat. It's the first week or 10 days, I think, of maybe 2 weeks of the Normandy invasion at the battalion scale. I'm particularly interested to see how it handles the invasion itself, and I've actually got the pieces set aside for the Omaha scenario. There's a decent scenario selection in here. I picked this up off of. I picked this up off of. Did I get it off of eBay or Board Game Geek? I forget. I forget where I got that. But I did pick this up in the soapbox. I'm not sure this ever appeared in the flat tray. I have never seen it in the flat tray, which isn't definitive, but I've never seen it in the flat tray, and I'm not sure that it came in a flat tray. But it's an interesting looking game, and again, I kind of want to see the contrast between Goss and which I'm kind of sort of starting to get comfortable with, and this game, it's antecedent, if you will. We keep doing that. Next, I have not played any of the Area Impulse games, and I picked this one basically out of topical interest more than anything else. Alan Salazar mentions SPI's Finnish War, which I think they redid that recently in the magazine, but I could be wrong. And if that is the case, then you need to go and do the legwork to see whether it resembles the original game at all, or is a light refinishing, or is a completely faithful repackage straight down to the errata. You never really know until you check it out. Stigler says Winter War, and yeah, that is what the game is actually called. I knew what he was talking about. So communication is all about communication after all. Tim Sales mentions Panzerkrieg, which is of course a John Prados game. New edition. Another thing here I'll mention is that a decent number of these games have new editions that have come out relatively recently or much more recently, or are on the not too far horizon. Now, Panzerkrieg's not on this list, but there is a new edition of Panzerkrieg coming from Compass, in which the unfortunate death of John Prados is apparently not going to cause a delay in. So his involvement was complete at that point. So Breakout Normandy. I'm super interested in Normandy as a topic. That's why I picked this one. And I have never played any of the Area Impulse games, so I figured this would be the natural one to do. So I'm kind of hovering over eBay trying to figure out uh, what I need to pay for a copy and if I'm willing to pay it or not, which is unlikely because I am fundamentally a cheapskate. Um, Next up, thank you, Mark Ruggiero, for also known as Clark Commando 1983, for sending me a copy of Caesar's Legions. Now, I will mention, and I didn't mention it till now because I knew I was going to talk about this, that Mark is and his wife are battling cancer right now. There is a link in the video description to their GoFundMe page to help them with recovery and medical costs. So please, if you can donate, please donate. A couple of weeks ago, we had the big benefit show for Mark, which I have to say I thought was very successful, and Mark seemed pleased. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Mo from Mo's Game Table, who sold a game on his own after the show and sent the money Mark's way. So the circle of wargaming has closed around Mark and his family in a very reassuring way. I'm very happy that we have been able to come together despite our many differences over whether or not Twilight Struggle is a war game. We've been able to come together over something that's more important than games. So all games are better without miniatures, in my opinion. But that's me. Jim, of course, just his head just came top of his head just came off. So this isn't an operational ancients game. There are very few operational ancients games for a variety of reasons. One of which, though, is just that there's no real sources for that. You've got like ancient sources, but Caesar's not talking about his baggage train. He's talking about how great Caesar was and how formidable the enemies of Caesar were. Right. So the operational details of the campaigns of the ancient world are very thin on the ground in the historical primary sources. In the secondary sources, you might get more, but they're secondary, tertiary, and quaternary sources, right? So, um, so thanks, Mark, for sending me this. It looks really interesting. I didn't know until I found this out when we did that episode. This originally is a game that came out from Game Designers Workshop and was later picked up by Avalon Hill. Now, it's the only example of a game I think where that was the case. Avalon Hill picked up games from a lot of companies, but as far as I know, this is the only one they got from GDW, and that in itself is fairly interesting. The box cover is kind of neat. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that particular shade of magenta, but and pretty much that is how it looks. But the game itself looks interesting. Let me put it that way. I don't want to say it looks great because graphically it doesn't look great. It looks like it came out in 1975. But it mechanically it looks fairly interesting, and I would like to get it. And there's a decent chance we may get this to the table this year because it's not that big. Next up, I talked about wanting to do some compare and contrast between kind of new visions and old visions with the old Atlantic Wall and the new Atlantic Wall, and this is the same thing. I've played a decent amount of the modern incarnation of Great Battles of the American Civil War from GMT, and this is from the original incarnation of Great Battles of the American Civil War from SPI. And I picked this one again because this is one of the ones that I have. Although thinking about it, the point here is not to pin it on Cedar Mountain specifically. The point here is to say I'd like to try the old system too, so I can converse more knowledgeably about how the old system works and how the new one is different. Um, this I do have this in the magazine version. I'm not sure there was a version outside the magazine because this is like 1981, so this is very late SPI. SPI goes under in like late January or early February of 1982, by the way. So I've got Drive on Washington. Thank you, Gilbert Collins. I've got P Ridge. Thank you, random person on Facebook 7 or 8 years ago. So I've got, and those are punched, and so I may actually do um, um, P Ridge or Drive on Washington. But what makes this one attractive is that the new system has covered the Battle of Cedar Mountain as well. The game Twin Peaks contains Cedar Mountain and South Mountain, and so it would be very, which I have not played. Um, so it would be very interesting to play out Cedar Mountain in the old system and then play out Cedar Mountain in this original system, and then do a compare and contrast there. I think that would be super duper interesting. So it's not to say that this particular title is a timeless classic. If there is a timeless classic in this series, it's clearly Terrible Swift Sword and not Cedar Mountain. But nobody would argue with me. But playing Terrible Swift Sword, and I have played new GBACW Gettysburg and 3 Days of Gettysburg, which is a very good experience. That's a little too much of a project for me to want to tackle that whole thing, which you're going to laugh at when you see some of the entries later in the list. So Cedar Mountain is on that list. Next up is Cobra. So this is a one map game, originally appeared in S&T, and this is the S&T cover. This has been redone 3 times, first by TSR, and then 2 different new editions from Decision. Okay, one in the magazine, which I want to say was 250, S&T 250. And then they recently-ish, well, like probably 4 years ago now, did a boxed version of their Cobra. Now, starting with the TSR, so this is a one map game of the Cobra Breakout, but the TSR edition actually adds a map to the north and includes the landings as well. So you're not just getting the Breakout, you're getting the whole story of the invasion, build up and lodgment, and then the Breakout. And to me, that is more interesting, even if it doesn't necessarily make it a better game. Killing Ground and Overlord function the same way. Killing Ground is the Breakout, Operation Cobra. And then Overlord adds on to that if you want to do the landings with an additional map. So same basic idea there. This is going to be easier to play than Killing Ground and Overlord, I'll tell you that, because this is a 19, I forget what year this came out, but this is somebody else, I think, and Brad Hessel design. It's a design that a lot of people feel holds up extremely well nowadays. One of the best enduring SPI titles, particularly out of S&T. So this is now, if I play this, I'm probably going to play the Decision version because that's the one I've got. But this is one where I did the legwork, and Decision hasn't monkeyed with it a lot. So I'm just as happy to play the Decision version in this case. So on the list are some of the SPI quad stuff that I haven't played. Now, I'm on the record as saying I don't really feel like some of the SPI quads hold up particularly well, or they are not interesting to me. Modern Battles quad, not interesting to me. Modern Battles 2, Blue and Gray 1 and 2, I don't think hold up particularly well. The Island War quad, boy, I wish that was well regarded nowadays, because that would be one of the 2 that I have pictures of here. I'm not incredibly interested in the Crimean War, but there's some great YouTube video on it for one thing. And there is some pretty dramatic moments, right? We got an epic poem out of it after all. So it's either going to be this one or the 30 Years War quad. These quads are, I think, not where the state of the art is for either of these conflicts. Although there's been a lot more coverage of 30 Years War battles since this time than there have been of Crimean War battles. But that's not to say there's either zero or a lot on either topic, right? But I think I feel like 30 Years War is more interesting for me personally. But I think these games at least hold up reasonably well among the quads. The one that holds up the best, I don't think there's a question. I think it's Napoleon's Last Battles. We've talked about that before. Napoleon at War holds up less well, but it's a different quad with different battles and a different system. Ironically, I feel like the selection of battles chosen for Napoleon at War is better than the 100 days, the 400 days battles that we got in Napoleon's Last Battles. But the system works better, I think, in Napoleon's Last Battles. So there's that. So one of these 2, I'd like to get at least one of these old SPI games played. There are basically excellent tabletop simulator modules for all of these, I think. And these are games that, as Jim Ozarski can attest, work very well in tabletop simulator because they are low counter count, low stacking density, relatively compact and easy to play. So So the SPI quads got alphabetized with Crimean War, but they're kind of whichever one I get to. Now I own none of them. Is that true? Uh that is true. I own, of course, the OSG later envisioning of the Napoleon's Last Battles, Napoleon's Last Gamble. I would kind of like an SPI version of Napoleon's Last Battles, again, to compare and contrast. Although in this case, I have played Napoleon's Last Battles too, but I would like to study it more. There are some people that actually prefer the Napoleon's Last Battles version of that game. I don't, but I'd like to better understand where those folks are coming from. Um, so in addition, the battles here, Nordlingen and Lutzen in particular, are interesting, pretty good battles. Here, the Battle of the Alma and the Battle of Inkerman are really the only the two that I have some knowledge of, not much. Um, so moving on from the SPI quads. Now, this is one that is nominally on the calendar as a side game for Winterfest. The downside to that is I'm not sure we're going to get that much done because several of the players who have expressed interest in this are also going to be playing the Goss Wacht am Rhein game. If I haven't mentioned this, we were going to play Atlantic Wall. We have changed our minds and we'll be playing Wacht am Rhein instead um, for that Goss game. So I am not sure how much time we're going to be able to dedicate to this, but I would like to at least noodle with it. I have never played Empires in Arms. I have it. I've looked at the rules. It looks neat. I've talked to people who have played it. I've had somebody gave me a walk through the thing. It looks pretty neat, and there's not really anything else quite like it. I don't think. So it's a unarguable classic, and I will be delighted to have played it at some point. So, um, Joe Perez says the common opinion is that each SPI quad game had one excellent game, two average games, and one waste of time. I think that's probably true to some extent, but with time, I think that has highlighted the strengths and deficiencies of the systems because now we have plenty of games about Waterloo, right? You didn't have as many games about Waterloo back when Napoleon's Last Battles came out. Even Quatre Bras and Ligny and Wavre, those games are extensively covered inside the hobby. So we have a lot more to pick from. So I think nowadays we're more likely to go and take a second look at those old games based on their mechanics or the history, and not the history, but the wargaming history. The fact that these are important games in the history of hobby wargaming, right? Fifth wheels, the one that Stigler mentions that some quads had fifth wheels that were better than any of the games in the quad. The one that's commonly said this is the case with is Tannenberg, which is the fifth game uses the same system as the Great War in the East quad, but wasn't in the Great War in the East quad box. It was in they may have done it in the magazine, or they may have done it in a folio, or they may have done it in both. I actually don't remember. So Perfidious Albion asks, which is easier to play in a group, Empires in Arms or GMT's Napoleonic Wars? Napoleonic Wars is a reasonably conventional card-driven point-to-point game. Okay, but it's a multiplayer card-driven point-to-point game, and I feel it's less sensitive to the number of players being the right number of players than Empires in Arms is. Folks with more experience with Empires in Arms will be a better judge on that. But in any event, tons more of these. These are in like completely I think these are in order by core actually, rather than in any sensible order. Of course, I'm not sorting them that way because you can reassign this stuff. Jim says Empires in Arms is a lifestyle choice, which I think does in fact have some truth to it. The CDG it works with 2 players, frankly. Works with 4 or 5 players. 3 players, I think you could make that work. Empires in Arms, you wouldn't play it with 3 or 4 players. You really do want this. You could leave the Turks out, but I wouldn't want to leave out anybody else. Don't expect your Empires in Arms game to develop along historical lines, generally speaking. I think Napoleonic Wars is a fantastic game. I've played that several times, and it's a very good game. I hope that at some point GMT brings it back out. Next up is Empires of the Middle Ages. This is a Jim Dunnigan design. This is a grand strategic game about the Middle Ages from 771 to 1467, which is interestingly specific, let's say. But it's a very interesting looking game. Now, this is the SPI version. There is a more recent Decision Games version, which does change some really big things. The mechanics are supposed to be pretty much the same, but there's a bunch of extra new optional stuff that's in there. And they made the map, which is a point-to-point map in the SPI version, into an area map in the Decision version. Now, that may be topologically, I should say, equivalent. They can, in theory, they can be, and I would hope that they are. And if so, that's good move, because then that gives you more space other than the little boxes to put stuff. Great. So that's great. But I have not done the study that will tell me that or not. Now, I don't have the SPI version. I do have the Decision Games version. It looks pretty good. Counters have center nibs. So it will never get punched on this show, because my rule for punching counters with center nibs is they have to be cut off the sheets with a craft knife. And I'm not going to sit there and do that on the show while talking and looking at the camera. I'll end up cutting myself and bleeding, running back and forth in front of the camera because I'm bleeding to death. So we're not going to do that. SPI copies of Empires of the Middle Ages, which used to go for decent change, don't seem to go for tons of money nowadays. So if I can get a copy of the SPI version for a price I find attractive, I will buy that. Otherwise, eventually I'll play the Decision version. Well, the Simonson graphic design, when you're not talking about art, you're talking about graphic design. It's better, okay? Simonson's graphic design is in almost every case better than stuff anybody else was doing at the time, which is why in some cases you'll see like Avalon Hill or TSR, where they could use the Simonson design. They did. They couldn't always, but they did. And we'll see another example or two of that. So Empires of the Middle Ages, very interesting looking game. Also on the list of, like, okay, there's this group of games I'd like to play. And this is not my topic. This is, Cold War gone hot in the 80s. This is the Central Front series. I picked this one more or less arbitrarily because it's the one with the highest rating on BGG. But that doesn't I'd want one of the ones that SPI did rather than the one that TSR did. But there's some really interesting mechanical things going on in this system. And for that reason, I believe it is absolutely worth a look nowadays. Now, there's I just knocked a stack of counters over. There's a new-ish series that appeared in Modern War magazine called 7 Days to the Rhine, which I believe was a Thai Bomba effort, which was 4, maybe 5 games that more or less paralleled these. And I think those originally got started as a Decision attempt to do a new Central Front series while not using any of the old Central Front ideas or any of it. Was going to be another complete redesign. There was a lot of pushback, and Decision Games at least had the decency to put a new name on it. I do appreciate that they did that, rather than creating confusion. Barlev is not on this list. John Schomburg, welcome back to the stream. But it easily could have been, right? The length of these lists is limited by what I think I can get through in 2 hours. And so there's a number of things that didn't make it. But Barlev is actually one of them. Barlev is one of the only 2 games I think about the Arab-Israeli wars that have tempted me. And in the case of Barlev, it's just because it's really, if you'll like it, it's kind of your one-stop shop for Arab-Israeli wars, right? The other of those 2 games is, of course, the upcoming, I think it's called Test of Faith. It's the BCS Arab-Israeli war game, and that is interesting to me because it's BCS. There are multiple games coming, including something from Adam Starkweather on the Arab-Israeli wars. And Barla was recently ish released, re-released by Compass in a very nice looking edition, but which I understand is a quite different game than the original Barla from GDW. So there's this Folder Gap, there's BAOR, and then there's Danao Gap, which I think was done during the TSR era, and the it is not as well regarded as the others and doesn't interlink with the others seamlessly. The Decision has some good games. Just be careful, right? You got to do the research. RAF in particular is very good, and I do have a list of a relatively small stack of games that I think it's time got migrated away from my library. And there aren't any decision games in that list, but that's largely because I've generally been fairly careful about which ones I buy. So bear that in mind. So something in the Fifth Core, in the Central Front series. Oh, it might be Fifth Core. It might be something different. I don't know. Whichever one falls into my hands. This one I do have. This is very late SPI Fighting Sail. This is an Age of Sail game. Jim Ozarski has played this on their stream. It looks pretty neat. It is an Age of Sail game that is much lighter, much more compact than something like Wooden Ships and Iron Man, which is another game that's on my list of things I played back in the day, but would like to get back to, is Wooden Ships and Iron Man. I haven't played it in 25 years, something like that. Were I more interested in the topic, Doug Sunset, who mentions the Assault series from GDW, that probably would have made this list as well. But I'm just not that high on this topic, right? And if I was going to add the next war, the SPI next war to this list, which I considered doing, I didn't because I probably would be better off playing the 1985 series from Thin Red Line nowadays. And as Doug also points out, this was one of the last 2 or maybe 3 issues that SPI did before they got devoured by TSR. So this never appeared outside the magazine. And it does have a pretty good reputation as a much lighter wargaming, but still very wargaming alternative to something like Wooden Ships and Iron Men, or more contemporary editions like Close Action, or even Flying Colors. So I mean, Eric Hansen says that it is the GOAT, greatest of all time, of fighting sail games. And I agree, but I'd like to try this too. So, and I have it, which is great. So this is one of the big games on the list, and it may be the only one of the big games on this list that when I do play it, and I have strong confidence that that will happen, that we are likely to play the whole thing rather than a scenario. This is Fire in the East from Game Designers Workshop. Now, this originates in the 74 release, Drang Austin. This is kind of a second edition of that. I don't think that's worth anybody's time nowadays. And I don't think you are well advised to try and retrofit the Total War rules onto this, because they made a lot of changes to make it work with a completely redesigned map, and those rules are not necessary. Now, I've played at this point what I consider to be a decent amount of Europa. I probably played 500 hours Europa. And but I've never played the East Front stuff. So this is the series. It might be the only entry on the list of series that I have played, but I haven't played a particular volume in. But yet it's pretty high on the list because I want to see that East Front experience that Europa is supposed to be best at. And frankly, I believe that statement, and that's why I want to try it. And almost certainly at some point will try it. Also helpful is that I have it. So not yet been able to score a copy of Scorched Earth. That is it's really the only important thing that I'm missing from Europa at this point. I also don't have their Finest Hour, but I would never play that. I don't have Fall of France, but I would never play that unless I got a gangbusters deal on one of those. I would not bite. And there are no gangbusters deals on Scorched Earth. That thing goes for a minimum of $300. So the attraction of Europa is not that it's awesome. Okay, It's that it really is a unique experience that you are not getting elsewhere, where you're getting to play the whole East Front on this huge map. And this thing only goes to like mid 1942, by the way, which is annoying. And you need Scorched Earth to take up the slack after that. And Scorched Earth doesn't go all the way. There was supposed to have been a third volume. Scorched Earth, I think, goes to early 44. Um, so that is not a thing that I mean, if they had done it, that would be different. The volume that the extra volume that they did do was the Urals. However, it's my opinion that if you need the Urals maps, meaning that the Germans are within striking distance of the east map edge of the Scorched Earth maps, that your Soviet player is almost certainly going to concede the game. So I have the Urals because I was able to get it inexpensively. But if you are missing the Urals, I would lose absolutely zero sleep about that. Ed Holtzman says he played Gary Grigsby's War in the East, and that's a completely reasonable position to take too. I think those are quite good. At least the first one is. I haven't played the second one, but I have a pretty high opinion of the first one. Would I rather play that than this? I wouldn't. I'd rather play Fire in the East, but that's not to say that the Gary Grigsby's War in the East games are not pretty respectable, especially compared to other computer war games, which generally are not good. So, next up is Frederick the Great. Now, this is the magazine. This originally appeared in S&T. This is the not awesome magazine cover, and I know this is a period painting or woodcut or whatever it was, but it does not look cool. And the fact that they put Frederick the Great in tiny letters at the bottom is not awesome. Not an awesome choice. This is the much better and presumably Redmond Simonson. He may have done both for all I know. I don't know. Maybe he had a bad day. Much better flat tray version. Now, SPI, to my knowledge, did not do a boxed version of this, but we'll see the Avalon Hill box in a minute. Avalon Hill did. This is a game that is said to hold up extremely well. I do have a copy of it in the SPI flat. I understand that there are rules reasons why one. I'd be very interested to hear what the chat has to say on this. I understand that there are rules reasons why one might prefer the Avalon Hill version. That said, and I kind of would like an Avalon Hill version, but and the graphics are the same. However, the map in the Avalon Hill version is one of those like one-piece map things that Avalon Hill said was like going to be the greatest thing ever, was going to change the course of wargaming, and they were all garbage. So I don't know if they're all like that, because they did move away from that style of map eventually. But I'd be afraid of getting one of those maps because those things bowed right out of the box. Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Welcome back. Those things warped tremendously, almost instantly. They are extremely low quality maps. Whereas with the SPI game, you at least, I mean, nobody's gonna win an art prize for the map in here, okay? But at least on the SPI one, the map's just paper, and you can put plexi over it, right? So this is a Frank Davis design. It's said to really capture the feel of the the 7 Years War period. I am very interested in playing this, and this is another one of those things that I'm probably going to take the initiative myself and just throw on a table and play at some point this year. That's my goal. My copy is in a flat. It's unpunched. It's one of the few games where I wanted it badly enough that I was willing to put up with the flat to get it. Vicky, welcome back to the stream. The other two are Outreach and another game that we'll talk about pretty soon. Might even be next, actually. Here is the Avalon Hill version. Okay, this is a very nice box, Roger McGowan box, and I mean, it's obviously, patterned after certain historical portraits, but I think it's a pretty good box cover. Let me put it that way. And I'd be happy to have an Avalon Hill version, but if I don't get one, it's not the end of the world either. In fact, that game I was thinking might be the next game is in fact the next game, Le Grand Armée. So there's a bit of a story behind this as well. This is a pretty early, I want to say 1972 SPI effort, and it was well regarded well into the 90s. This is Campaigns of Napoleon in Central Europe. Okay, so this is an operational game. Um, and Napoleonic operational is a space that we don't see enough of, in my opinion. And there's not a lot of alternatives in the hex and counter operational Napoleonic space to the Kevin Zucker Campaigns and Napoleon series, and I want to see something else, right? And Le Grand Armée was it. I got a good condition copy in a flat tray. Believe it's unpunched. It better be, because if it's punched, you never know what's going to be in the compartments. Um, Also a pretty nice cover. I mean, the rendition of the art here is kind of awful, but again, the graphic design is really, really good. Very striking white cover, which of course, if you get a physical copy, this is a digitally cleaned up version. If you get a physical copy of this, it's going to look like somebody wiped their ass on it. So just because it's literally 50 years old. Now, there is a second game called Le Grand Armée, and it's this game. This is a game by Mark Akers, and this is a substantially different game. I would actually draw the analog between this and the original Le Grand Armée with Goss' Atlantic Wall and Joe Balkowski's Atlantic Wall, in that there's some foundational stuff where you could kind of see where they built from, but it's basically a different game. Now, I have both of these, okay? The interesting thing about this Le Grand Armée is you notice that instead of 1805 to 1809, this is 1805 to 1815. So other than the Peninsular War, and that's because Spain is just not on the maps, this covers the whole thing of the Napoleonic period or the imperial period, I should say, from 1805 to the end, on basically that same scale. This is a 4-map game that covers almost all, pretty much all of Europe from France east all the way to Moscow. So it's a pretty interesting looking game and very ambitious. My understanding is that it does not work particularly well. And we may experiment with it at some point. This is another one I picked up because I wanted to see it, and I've looked at it, and I'm like, the one that's actually on the list is the SPI one. This one I'd like to noodle with, but I'm not under any particular time constraints on that. This cover art is by Jim Holloway, who was one of the D&D artists, and who did a decent number of the Spitzer Wargame covers. And I feel like the style just doesn't really work particularly well, but maybe it's just because we're not used to original art, as opposed to here is a photo of a Panzer. That may be a weird wargame or closeted taste thing. But if so, it is a preference that I personally share. Not to say that original art has never been good. There's certainly examples of where it has. But I don't think stylistically that Jim Holloway style was a good fit for war games myself. Let alone Larry Elmore, who also did one or two of them, and none of that appear on this list. This is definitely the only Spitzer game I put on the list. But again, this is just to show you and explain which game I'm talking about, as opposed to this later version, which I think again is interesting and has potential. It's worth somebody taking a look at it to maybe fix it up. But Le Grand Armée is the classic that we're going to be playing. Speaking of Napoleonics, here is Napoleon at Bay. Now, Napoleon's late campaigns number 2. I'm unclear as to what Napoleon's late campaigns number 1 was, since this series has kind of started and restarted and restarted and rebooted and unbooted, and it's a mess. Okay, so in any event, yes, I believe that will be coming in the next issue of Strategy and Tactics. So, this is the original cover. This is a picture of a Napoleonic cavalry officer, a pretty cool looking outfit, I think you gotta say, and a fabulous hat. Very dark cover. Now, this is the original OSG cover, as far as I can tell. I don't believe I've ever physically seen a copy of this. I've seen pictures of it. It's part of the campaign nowadays. we call it part of the Campaigns of Napoleon System 1X, which means it's the regular scale rather than an adjusted scale to account for the fact that it's a huge campaign and you have to rescale the whole thing and then make some rules adjustments based on the fact that you just rescaled the whole thing. So there have been multiple editions of this. The way BGG tracks it, I believe there's there's 2 editions. There's this one and Avalon Hills edition, which are the same edition according to BGG. And then there's OSG's later edition, which is a different edition according to OSG. There's some reason to separate them that way, but BGG does not do that in any consistent or coherent way. This is a very interesting looking operational game where you have sort of a command point economy that you can burn the command points to have your leaders do things. But then there is an attrition economy where it costs them attrition to do things. It's a pretty interesting looking system. And whenever folks ask me about operational Napoleonics, I always kind of hem and haw and say, hey, there's not really that much in this space, but this is kind of the in the lead, right? It is not as dominant in its space as, say, Great Campaigns of the American Civil War is in Civil War operational. But nevertheless, it's something that if you're interested in that topic at that scale, that you really need to have a look at. And Napoleon at Bay is the one that I'd like to play, although what that may look like is actually playing Battle for Italy or 100 Days Battles instead, because those are way smaller. But this is a 2-map game, so it's a decent-sized game, too. At least the one I have, which is the later OSG one. Next up is the horrific Avalon Hill cover for Napoleon at Bay. This looks like one of the Dot grandchildren drew it. I am not sure what they were thinking. I don't know if this is a period piece of art or not. I believe it is not, since there's what appears to be an artist's signature at the bottom, an artist who was presumably not embarrassed to put his name on this. This is a terrible cover, and one wonders what the decision makers at Avalon Hill were thinking when they put this thing on the box, unless they were trying to sabotage the sales of the game, or it was nepotism. One of those two is my guess. Tony from Tony's Board Life, welcome back to the stream. So I have a friend who's great at art. We all have that friend who's great at art. Well, this guy was not so great at art. I mean, this guy looks, this art looks better. This is comparable to the bad art in Powers and Perils. And I could talk about that at length, but I'm not going to go into that tonight either, because that requires more of an explanation than you're going to get on a Wargaming show. Next up is the all-time classic, which I need to play. I don't have this, though, so that's why I haven't played it yet. This is Patton's Third Army is bad, but I think not as bad as that. We'll talk about that in a second. Panzergruppe Guderian. This is a Jim Dunnigan design, I believe. And this is the progenitor of the sort of variable strength chit mechanism, which has differed significantly between this and Operation Typhoon and the Victory in the West series. There's a lot of significant differences there, but this is where that starts. And I think it's a really good idea to, and every wargamer should play this at least once. Let me put it that way. Also, it happens to be on a topic I more or less have some idea about, the battle around Smolensk, right? Which is the subject of the OCS game Smolensk, and which I have played multiple times, actually, and have enjoyed a lot. So I have, some idea what's going on. This is not a game that goes for a giant pile of money, but it's not super cheap either. Now, this is the S&T cover. SPI did a boxed version of this, which is a similar looking, like obviously Redmond Simon-esque cover, which also looks about the same, looks pretty good. But then the Avalon Hill cover is a Roger McGowan cover, and I actually think this is a very strong cover too. I'm not sure what motivated Roger to put the giant red arrows on there, but it's a cool effect, and I think it totally works. It's a classic, really high on the list to play. So this is the one that's going to get me demonetized probably. So I'm gonna move back to Panzergruppe Guderian real quick. So the plot to assassinate Hitler is a Jim Dunnigan design. It's about the July plot to assassinate Hitler and only blew his pants off. That plot, and it's a really interesting game. And I'm not. I think it's one of those Dunnigan designs that is a really fascinating piece of design work, but you can't really say that it necessarily completely works. Um, I think that's probably a reasonable assessment of that game. I have it. I think my copy, which came from Fucko, is missing a piece or two, but there's not that much stuff in that, so I believe I can fix that if that's a problem. Um, it is probably fascinating is a good word to describe that. It's a really interesting looking game where there's like this hex map, but the hex map kind of represents a political space that has some correspondences to physical locations, but doesn't represent physical locations. It's really interesting. Again, I'm not sure, like Tito, I'm not sure that it's going to work as a game or necessarily be super duper engaging. But I really do want to try it. I'm not sure you could call it a classic either. I'm not sure you could call it a classic, and I really want to try it to kind of see what it has going for it in depth there. Jim Dunnigan was decades ahead of his time in a lot of these game design ideas, and I think that's another one in the plot to assassinate Hitler. Meandering Mike says it's loosely based on the scrimmage mechanics. I mean, maybe, but remember the scrimmage mechanics were loosely based on all the war games they'd already done. So I think that is true, but possibly not important. So next up, also unplayed by me. Now I have played Advanced Third Reich much later. And this is, of course, the John Prados classic. We've talked about this before. This is one of the seminal games in the entire hobby and the progenitor of basically every strategic level World War II game that has come out after it, including Axis and Allies. So, really important game. I do have a copy. Actually, I have two copies of this. I have a copy and a partial copy, I should say. Where I kept all the counters because I didn't want to count them, but I only kept the nicer map and the nicer cards and the nicer rulebook, and the not nicer components were in bad shape. People who were playing when this came out in 1974 played the pants off of this. So a very interesting design, mechanically foundational design that is very important to the games that came afterwards. I guess I don't know if this is a Roger McGowan cover, but I'd be shocked if it wasn't because it's very similar to something Roger would do. And it's a fabulous cover too, very eye-catching cover. This is a cover that really works. Next up is Russian Civil War. This is the best picture I got of it. I have this too because I have almost every game ever released on the Spanish Civil War. That's not the case. But Russian Civil War, yeah, I've got most of them. The big one that I'm missing is La Revolution Russie from Azure Wish, and I'm never going to get that. Russian Civil War, again, Jim Dunnigan designed this. This is part of the Power Politics series. Fascinating design. It's a multiplayer game, but the players do not correspond to the many factions inside the Russian Civil War. So it's really interesting that you might end up rooting for a certain faction some of the time and then attacking yourself, attacking forces that you control to try to consolidate your power later on. I'm not convinced that this works, but I'm told that it actually does work fairly well and is supposed to be a still a really good game. So again, I've got this. It's on the list of things to play, but it's not at the top of the list, frankly, because it's a big multiplayer game, and it's going to be hard to organize that. So other than playing it at a convention, which certainly could happen, I probably never going to get to this unless I solitaire it, which is possible. Clark Commander 1983, Mark, welcome back. Thanks for coming in. Alistair Logie says, what do I think is the best game on the Russian Civil War? Most of the people who will tell you, who have played more than one of them, will tell you Triumph of Chaos. The second edition, at least, of Triumph of Chaos, which is the one that I have, is a giant mess. Loads of errata, loads of significant problems. My understanding is that if you are willing to fight your way through that, it is worth the effort. If you do not want to exert that effort, go get a copy of Red's Ted Racer's game on the Russian Civil War, which is out of print right now, but you should be able to score a copy without spending too much money. And I've played that, and that's a pretty good game too. It's kind of not, the balance is not awesome, but I'm not sure that's a problem in representing the events historically, right? So so one of those two would be where I would go. Alternatives include, like I mentioned, La Révolution Russie from, or La Russie from Azure Wish. Good luck finding that. There's a game called, that was in Against the Odds, called, shit, I can't remember it, but I have it. There's of course the first edition um, of Triumph of Chaos, also from Clash of Arms. There's Red Russia from Avalanche Press, which looks to me to be like a lot like Risk set in the Russian Revolution. I'm being a little callous and unfair to it in saying that, but not that callous or unfair. So there's another one that I'm not remembering. There's also, if you're interested in the Revolution part of it, or the prelude to it, I guess, there's also Prelude to Revolution coming from Compass, which should be out this year. That's Mike Wilner's game. I've played that. I have a very high opinion of that. I can't wait for that to come out. So and we should see that at some point this year. So there haven't been that many games on the Russian Civil War, and I'm talking about games on the whole thing, right? There are topical games on particular battles. Or this is the one. Russia 1917. It's not called. I'm thinking of La Révolution Française, which is their game about Azure Wish's game about the French Revolution, which I'd also like to see, but which similarly I am unlikely to ever have pass through my hands. Very unlikely that will occur. Their games are very difficult to get, especially here in the US, but they're not easy to get anywhere. So if you are an Azure Wish collector, good luck. I will buy your copy of Le Grand Guerre off of you, maybe. That was a good point. First two-player games, Russian. So this isn't a two-player game, though. It's a multiplayer game. There's like 5 or 6 seats in this game. But I think I see what you're saying, Joe Perez. That's very interesting. And actually, I think this probably would solo relatively well. So after Russian Civil War, great cover too, by the way, is of course Russian Campaign. Now, this is probably at the top of the God, I ought to play this list, right? Because I have like 2 iterations of it already. There's another one coming from GMT, which I have not ordered and probably won't because I don't need another one. Did we cock that? We did. This is the Avalon Hill cover. So this game originally came out of Jedco. Avalon Hill picked it up, and it has since passed through a couple of different sets of hands, including L2 did a version of it, and then it went to GMT for this new 5th edition, which has been boiling on P500 literally forever, and it's just now threatening to come out. We should see it, but there is also the pretty new edition of Russian Campaign from Compass. Now they're kind of selling this as the original 1974 edition because it harkens back not to the Avalon Hill edition, but to the Jedco version. Now I don't know enough about this, and this is one of my motivations for wanting to play this. I don't know enough about this to say, oh, you should play the Avalon Hill version. Oh, no, they ruined it. You should play the Jedco version. I don't know. So I'd like to know. So that's why it's on this list. I had the Avalon Hill one back in the day, but never played it. I've got the new Jedco reprint from Compass, and I've got one of its many successor games, Russia Besieged, also from Compass, which I would also like to play, and which I think is going, once I've played it anyway, is going to end up landing as my preferred game in the space of, games about the East Front on this approximate scale. and this approximate time investment and complexity and all that stuff. This is another one that everybody played the pants off of when it was in this cover. This is a great cover, by the way. Um, and it's something that I feel silly for not having played it. Let me put it that way, particularly since I had 2 copies at one point back in the day. Next up is another one in the series where it doesn't really matter what I play in the series, but I picked this one because this is the one that I am topically the most interested in. This is Sicily Race for Messina. This is part of the yet another one of those variable strength chit games, and I think it's here in Victory in the West where that really comes to fruition and reaches its final form, as it were. Um, So, and again, topically, this is the most interesting one for me. The others are Patton's Third Army and Operation Grenade. As someone pointed out previously, uh, Operation Grenade has a. It's another one of those covers. I hearken the Operation Grenade cover more to the Jim Holloway Le Grand Armée cover because it's by an unquestionably talented artist who stylistically is not right for what he was doing there. In the case of Patton's Third Army, that was Howard Chaykin, who would do a bunch of work for Marvel and then do some very tawdry stuff on his own later on, as I recall. But that aside, it's not a great cover, and uh, it's Patton and Lorraine, which is a topic I'm at least somewhat interested in. I think it's an interesting campaign, but I already have multiple games on it too. But I have all the Victory in the West games, and I really need to get these to a table at some point. That's come close a few times, but it has not yet come to pass. So at some point, and again, my pledge here to you, the viewers, and you'll get a full report when it happens, is that at least one, and hopefully more than one, of these games on this list will get to a table and be played by me sometime this year. All right, Clark, thanks. Clark Commander 1983, Mark, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. Now, of the 3, I'm interested in the Sicilian campaign, so that's why this one's on there. This is the most complicated of the 3, and for that reason, a lot of people don't like it. But I am reasonably confident that the complexity level by itself is not going to bother me. American Flag is exactly right. Yes. Roger Hemsath asks, is the reprint time on the 5th edition of Russian campaign longer than it took to actually fight the Russian campaign? And the answer is yes, indeed it was. So, I have previously speculated based on absolutely no information, just hunches and guesswork, that um, on the reasons for the delay, I am not going to do that tonight. So I'll let the people who actually know do the answering of those questions. I am not equipped to do that. I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to be the source of misinformation. Let me put it that way. Based on nothing more than my guesswork. If I think something's right, I will tell you. But I'm just guessing there. So we're not going to talk about that tonight. So we're going to have a lot of French pieces here. Holy cow. Next up, Wacht am Rhein. So this is also a Joe Balkowski with co-designers game, and it is a similar system, but not identical to that found in Atlantic Wall. I have not traditionally been a heavy bulge gamer. I have played relatively few bulge games, and nothing. That's not the right. Is it? It is. The lighting in here is fighting with me on being able to tell the blue from the black. I haven't really played that many bulge games, but it's an interesting topic and a very gameable topic, and that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of games on the topic, right? So Wacht am Rhein, it's Battle of the Bulge. It's exactly what you think it is. It's the battle we've all played out a million times. Just me, not as much. I'm not burned out on it. Let me put it that way. It's a big game. It's a 4-map game. It's approximately the same size as last Blitzkrieg or the Goss Wacht am Rhein, which we're playing now until somebody else's bathtub overflowed and destroyed that game. So I don't know what the details are on that. But it was a bad weekend here in Northeast Ohio for a lot of people. Um, Operation Grenade cover is okay. The Patton's Third Army cover is the really ugly one. Also, let me also mention though, this is another very late SPI game. Can I tell what issue it is? Number 89. So this is 91, but Monmouth was the last SPI S&T. Okay. So this is again right at the end. The map on this holds up today. It's a very, I should have got a picture of the map. Um, the, the map here is very attractive. So very happy to have this one. And okay, hold on. Excellent. Okay, we'll deal with that later. All right. Very attractive game, and the counters are fine. I mean, they're SPI counters. They're neither the worst nor the best SPI counters. Last, no, not quite last after Vakdam Rhine is War in the Pacific. Now, this is one of those ones where it's obviously a huge monster game. It's 7 maps. It wasn't play tested as a campaign, at least. They did play test the Guadalcanal scenario. And in fact, that's kind of what I would like to play. There's some very interesting things going on in here mechanically regarding ship refitting and logistics and stuff like that that I really do kind of want to check out. Do I think that it's going to shake out that this is a better game overall, or for me, than Pacific War, with which this has considerable overlap? Frankly, no. But nevertheless, I think there's some really interesting things happening in here. As with a lot of Irad Hardy designs, he had a hand in this as well as in a number of other games you could say this about, and some games that are just winners too, where there's some really interesting things going on here. James Whitmer says that Last Blitzkrieg is the only Bulge game anyone needs, in his opinion. And that's fine. And we're playing Last Blitzkrieg, not this week. Thank you, Tree. But we're playing Last Blitzkrieg now. I think it's fantastic. I like it a lot. However, the wargaming marketplace clearly disagrees with you because we continue to design and to sell and play different Bulge games. But absolutely, Last Blitzkrieg is excellent. This is so as Tom understands and knows when he's saying this, says just play Empire of the Sun. There's a lot of the same like philosophical design pieces that are shared by both Empire of the Sun and Pacific War, as you'd expect, both being designed by Mark Herman. This has different philosophical underpinnings, okay? Different design aesthetics. And I really want to check this out. Now, the decision War in the Pacific, I think, is a waste of time. May have some interesting things in it, but it's $400. It consistently goes for $400 or more, and I'm not paying for that. Somebody wants to sell me a copy for $30, I'll take their War in the Pacific from decision. Otherwise, I've got this. We'll try this. This is a thing that I'm almost certainly never going to play the campaign of, which probably means I shouldn't have paid $250 for it. But you know, we live with our own decisions, right? It just let me get out that if you are looking for a strategic level, which this isn't, a Pacific game, the first thing I will point people to is Empire of the Sun. It's a magisterial game that I have just an insanely high opinion of, and it will continue to be in print and be a favorite for a long time. It's also a game that is basically been continually in print, which is unusual nowadays for war games. Bob Kowalczyk says not a great box front. Are we talking about the War in the Pacific box front? Because I think it's pretty good. It's maybe not the best, but it's pretty good. That's a very striking picture of a burning carrier. I mean, I like that. I like this box particularly. Now, mine looks like it went down on the Arizona. So the insides of the game look great. The box is not in great shape and did require some repairs, but wasn't like completely unsalvageable either. But if anybody's got an empty War in the Pacific soap box that they'd like to sell me, do let me know. Email in the video description. So I think there's one or two more. It might be two more. It's only one more actually, and that is Wolfpack. Um, Alistair Logie, thanks so much. Much appreciated. The answer to this is yes, but I'm going to have to give you a. I'm going to have to look the name up because I don't remember it. I have the book and I've started reading it, but it's kind of heavy. But it's the book. What's it called? Shit. Richard Pipes, The Russian Revolution. That is the book that I would recommend. Now, that was recommended in turn to me by Mike Wilner, and Mike was right. That's a great book. There's actually a lot of literature on the Russian Civil War, much of it translated from Russian. Solzhenitsyn wrote like a 10-volume series on it, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Solzhenitsyn writing about the Russian Revolution. I mean, obviously, you're getting like literally, chair by chair detail on the meetings there. So if you're designing a game on the Russian Civil War, by all means, read Solzhenitsyn. If you're not, read Richard Pipes. And I believe Richard Pipes just passed away not too long ago. Anthony Beaver, who's I think I've read one book by him, has just done a Russian Civil War book. I'd turn to Richard Pipes first. That's just me. Other people might tell you something different. I have not read the Beaver book. All right, Wolfpack. And this is another sort of mid 70s SPI design. I've participated in some talk about this game recently, or listened in on some talk about this game recently. And again, it sounds like it's doing some fairly interesting things as well. Alistair points out that Richard Pipes is on sale for $5 in the US Kindle store. So there you go. Go ahead and do that. But Wolfpack looks pretty interesting, right? And I like submarine stuff. Who doesn't like submarines? Submarines are cool. So Chuck Turner, welcome back to the stream. Haven't seen you in a while. As Perfidious Albion says, Solzhenitsyn, but I mean, you're undertaking a giant project. Don't start with Solzhenitsyn, okay? So start with somebody else. If that's Red Victory or Anthony Beaver or Richard Pipes, unless you are really into this topic, and it's Solzhenitsyn, right? It's not easy to read. So Richard Pipes actually wrote in English, and doesn't require the work to have been translated for you to read it in English. Unless you can read it in Russian, he may be very readable in Russian, as far as I know, but I doubt it. So, and apparently Beaver does not read Russian, according to Paul Grassmere. Welcome back to the show. So, is that the last one? That is the last one. Wolfpack, alphabetical order. So we've talked about kind of a lot of really interesting things. I did start with Glance when it came to reading stuff about the East Front, right? I used Glance as one of the more than one book by Glance as a source for my thesis paper for the history degree. So Flat Top does not make the list of John Stanley, but that is because I have played Flat Top. I have played a decent amount of Flat Top, although not as much as I would like. So there's kind of like two ways to look at these things, right? One, you got the classics. One, you got the old games that aren't classics. So there's four ways to look at these things. And we don't need to talk about those tonight. Thank you very much, John Stanley. I appreciate the super chat and the question. It doesn't need three people in two rooms. It's kind of built in, right? The mediated play is built into it. It plays better with a referee, but it plays fine without it. I mean, but you got a lot to deal with the paperwork. So there's, on the one hand, there's the old games that aren't classics, and we don't have to worry about those. There's the old games that are classics and we haven't played and we'd like to play, and the ones that I haven't played are on the list tonight. Then there's the classics that we played back in the day and we'd like to try again. And that's a separate list. Things like 1776 are on there. I forget what else is on there now. 1776 is on there. Freedom in the Galaxy is on there. A few other things from SPI and Avalon Hill. Then there's the classics that we played back in the day or didn't play back in the day, but are play reasonably regularly now. And for me, flat top falls into that category because we normally do a flat top, a refereed double blind flat top game in at Winterfest. I'm not sure we're doing that this year, but that's a great fun and just a tremendous experience, and I can't recommend it highly enough for those who were able to participate in a double blind flat top. So let's try the summary images. Sure, let's do that. Why not? Gonna get pictures of my wrecked car too. So we put up with that. Your super chats are appreciated because insurance is gonna bone me. Um, oh, April's Harvest. These are in alphabetical order, by the way, not in order of preference. Air Assault on Crete, which I kind of want to try. Atlantic Wall, the original Atlantic Wall. Eh. Breakout Normandy, representing the area impulse games. Caesar, let me move this over. I can do that now. Yeah, that's better. Caesar's Legions. Thanks, Mark, because it's an operational ancients game, and there aren't that many of those. Cedar Mountain, as the representative of the original Great Battles of the American Civil War series, because I've played the new one and would like to have played the old one to compare it. And the alternative is Terrible Swift Sword, which is a giant project. Cobra, because it's a classic, and everybody should probably try to play this at some point. Holds up very well. Crimean War and 30 Years War, representatives of the quads that I feel like are still worth a look that I haven't bragged about already, like Napoleon's Last Battles, but I played that. So, Empires in Arms, which I've never played, but which we might get to play at least a little bit of at Winterfest in just a few weeks, actually. Empires, Empires of the Middle Ages, Jim Dunnigan classic, very outside the box design. Not released in a tray, as far as I know. Fifth Corps, representing the Central Front series and its friction mechanic that I think has just tons and tons and tons of potential and hasn't really been leveraged in wargaming. Fighting Sail as an alternative to Wooden Ships and Iron Men, which is a far heavier game. Fire in the East, because I've played a lot of Europa at this point. Which two complete games, but two complete games of Europa is like 500 or 1,000 hours of playing. Because I haven't played it on the East Front, and I should probably to try and do this at least once. And if this is a disaster, I'm never playing Europa again. Frederick the Great, because it is a classic and has some really interesting mechanics on an undertreated period at this scale. There's a fair number of 7 Years War games about the battles. There's not a lot that's operational, and this is more operational. Looks like it's got some very clever ideas in it. More stuff on Frederick the Great. Le Grand Armée, very early SPI game, because it has Paul Grossmare, we'll talk about that in a second. Le Grand Armée, because it's operational Napoleonics, and I want to try something operational Napoleonic that wasn't designed by Kevin Zucker for the same reason that I want to try War in the Pacific, because I want to see what somebody else has to say about it too. TSR version of Le Grand Armée, which is not on the list. Original and later Napoleon at Bay, operational Napoleonic by Kevin Zucker. It's kind of the flagship game in that series, I guess you would say. We're having some focus issues here. Damn it. Panzergruppe Guderian, one of the most influential war games ever designed, should totally be played. Soldier King. Doug, are you talking about the Avalanche Press game called Soldier King or Soldier Kings? Because that actually has a pretty good reputation despite being from Avalanche Press. The Plot to Assassinate Hitler, because it looks really interesting mechanically, and I really kind of want to fiddle with it and see if it makes any sense at all. And how its ideas might be reinterpreted using more modern mechanics. Third Reich Seminal Classic. I've played some of the successor games, but I haven't played the original. Has a major influence on every single strategic level World War II game. Russian Civil War, incredibly novel mechanism where there are multiple factions and multiple players, but the factions don't line up with the players. Russian campaign, timeless classic. People still play this today, and there's a new edition coming out from GMT literally any minute now. Sicily, the race for Messina, representing the Victory in the West series, and by extension, the entire variable strength unit mechanic. And Wacht am Rhein, which is Battle of the Bulge, related system to Atlantic Wall, but I kind of want to try this, kind of want to see what it does. And I am reasonably sure, and I'm not willing to pay going rate for this, by the way, just to get that out there. But you guys are talking about the GDW Soldier King. That's different. The Avalon Hill, the Avalanche Press game, actually, Soldier Kings, I believe, actually does have a pretty good reputation. So Wacht am Rhein, I'd like to try it. Mostly that'd be a shelf ornament, though. War in the Pacific, I'd like to try it due to its interesting logistics and refit mechanisms, and because I want to see what somebody other than Mark Herman thinks about this topic at this scale. And Wolfpack, again, interesting topic, very interesting mechanical ideas in it. So let me pull that down. So we have, sorry about all the coughing, but we're just not quite able to shake that. I'll see if I can show you this without spilling these all over the place. So these are one of the prototype trays. We don't have the slide-on lids anymore, but since I got a giant stack of these, I'm using them for counter sorting until they can ready to go into the final trays. So we can see that these are what I'm calling stack trays. You put stacks of counters, approximately 10 counters per stack, but that depends on the thickness of the counters. I've gotten a surprising number of counters in this French tray so far. The British tray is not done yet because I needed the spacers. So I made, and I think I have 4 different designs on the spacers. The first one was just these blocks that fit into the slots. The second ones had a raised lip, so you could grab the bottom counter with the tweezer. But what would end up happening is you wouldn't grab the bottom counter; you'd end up grabbing the whole block and pulling the whole block out, which is undesirable. So I redesigned those to be little X-shaped things that also fit in the slots, and these work really well so far. But also have grooves for the tweezers, so that you will pick up the counters and not the spacer. And the reason for that is that these compartments, which are roughly 16 or 8, depending on which specific prototype we're talking about, the compartments are about 18 millimeters tall. That's more than half an inch. So what that means is that if they're not braced with a spacer, they can flop around and get kind of mixed up. They won't. And because there are slots, let me see if I have an empty one here. I do, but it's on the bottom, of course. Yeah, because there are slots between the there are pins with slots on the side, so you can get the tweezers in there to get the counters out. The counters will drift around if you don't use the spacers. So you need to make sure that however it lands. I am going to actually revisit the sliding lid, which I think works really well, when I start doing bin counter trays, which are going to be not the ones to hold individual stacks, but just like more of a conventional counter tray. Now I've got a very small, like 2-compartment prototype of that, which didn't turn out. And I really wanted, because I'm going to use a lot of these things, because these will store counters with minimal wasted space. I can get Case Blue in its box comfortably with using this technique. I may be able to get the Goss games in their boxes comfortably using this technique. I think the games that I can't get, I talked about this on Twitter, are so Nerd. Well, I'm not selling anything, right? I mean, people keep asking me this. I don't know what I'm going to do with the. I mean, I'd like to be able to share these designs, right? And I'd like to be able to get something back for the time. But the fact is that this, I'll pull up the what these things actually cost. So this is a. Get the bottom one out again. So this is a 48 6x8. Yeah, this is a 48 compartment or stack tray. Okay. And based on the calculation of the cost of the material and the cost of the time to run the printer, The cost of this is about $20. Okay. Now I used well the equivalent of two of these, which would run about $11 for Sicily, Triumph, and Folly. So to say that you're going to spend $44 to store Sicily, Triumph, and Folly, I think that's unreasonable. Meandering Mike, I tried this. This was a disaster. This caused the the print to not adhere on the bottom, and so the whole thing turned into a taco. Um, Complete disaster when I tried that. Also, now that I'm doing trace for half-inch counters, which I decided I was just look, I'm just going to stick with half-inch counters until it's all worked out, and then I'll scale it up to 9/16 and 5/8 inch counters. This may be more viable for larger counters. With counters this small, you'd have to make the hole about a quarter inch, and nobody's pinky is going to fit in that. So they're designed to be used with tweezers. They'll eventually be bin compartments in a similar array of sizes, right? So this would turn into like a 6 compartment tray. And what those would cost, I don't know what, I haven't done the prototyping on those yet, so I have no idea. They will come in a variety of splendid and period appropriate colors. You can see I've thought about this, including Bonaparte blue, Kutuzov green, Holy Roman white, Wellington red, Blucher black, and Gravina gold. Also including for our World War II and American Revolution people, colonial blue, Roman crimson, federal blue, and rebel butternut. Many colors are available. So don't think I haven't given this any thought. Um, so, oh, I'm totally geeking out. I have had this thing. I set this thing up on like December 27th, I think. And I have had this fucker running almost continuously since then. And the only time it hasn't is because it finishes overnight. And I have, don't get up at 4 a.m. to go pull the old print off the bed and put a new one up. So, I am absolutely loving this thing, and thanks to my wife for getting this for me because it's sucking up tons of time. Not really. I mean, you kind of babysit it a little bit. You check in on it every once in a while. But I've had, done a number of design iterations on the trays themselves, right? I think do I have an example? Well, I do, but it's the one that's full with the British. This is the British tray for Der Weltkrieg West Front. Okay, and I don't want to tilt it because you'll see that all the counters are near the top. Not all the stacks are necessarily 10 or 12 counters. There are spacers underneath. And the spacers, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this or not. You may be able to see the spacers in there that hold the counters up. I went through 4 different iterations on the spacers, and on this particular tray, I went through 11 different designs of this particular tray. That's a stack counter tray with a snap-on lid with holes in the sides to fit the tweezer arms and supports for the uprights so that we wouldn't have melting problems during the process of making them. So so I'm very happy. This is I guess this color is going to be Wavell khaki. That's what this color is, actually. So thematically appropriate colors are totally on the table. So, but yeah, I mean, what it will do for me as somebody who is like planning up to this point of having like a whole wall. So this wall in the game room is basically the same size. So about the size of 2 bookcases was going to be taken up by plastic bins holding counters for games where the counters don't all fit back in the box. This enables me to eliminate almost all of that. So that's kind of what I'm working towards here. Now, again, the big bottleneck is time. Do I have that here? I don't think I do. There's a 104 compartment tray, which is the biggest tray that I've worked on. And it takes 24 hours to print the bottom and another 7 hours to print the lid. So that's about 31 hours to print the whole assembly, right? And say in here in Der Weltkrieg, the French are going to get one, the German are going to get one, the British are going to get one of these 48s. The Americans are going to get a 24, and all the minors and miscellaneous stuff are going to get a 24, and it ought to work out great. So, I mean, I'm not taking any actual playtime away here. So, what took the playtime away is the tree falling down and crushing my fucking car. That's taken playtime away. Eric from Eric's Table Napoleonic Battles is taken off. He's got a show, La Bataille de Ligny, over in 5 minutes. So go check that out if you are interested. We are almost done here, but so we're playing Last Blitzkrieg, but I'm not going to be down there this week, obviously. I don't like the Plano trays because I think they're too bulky, but I have been told that the low profile Plano trays are a lot better. The games that I don't feel like I will be able to get in these 3D printed trays and get everything back in the box, probably ASL, but ASL may be a weird special case because I've got a lot of empty ASL boxes. I may be able to use that. So we'll see how that works out. We may make more progress on ASL than we think. Definitely ASL starter kit though. World in Flames, because the box is huge, but it's all taken up by like 11 mounted maps. So I'm not sure that I can make that work either. And I'm kind of still thinking about that perfect storage solution for World in Flames. And like the next step up from the current storage solution for World in Flames, which is here's the 1934 American piece or 1944 American pieces in a bag. It's a tray, but whatever. Hand them to the American player, and then you say, okay, sort at the beginning of the year, you sort all these out into your force pools. I would love to be able to be more detailed than that. I am not sure there is a better solution than that. A World at War, I think I can get it all in one box though. I think, but that may involve throwing the rule book in the recycling can and just using a printed rule book. I also bought a comb binder machine, by the way, so I can do that too. I need more combs. All I have are the combs that came with it, and they're too small for a lot of rule books. What was the other one? Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Now I think I can handle Ancients because I have Ancients and then the first double pack expansion. I may be able to handle Ancients. Napoleonics, I have everything. I don't think so. So that's a bit of a question. Right now, I'm not sure I see a way forward on Space Empires, but there will eventually be a 4-inch Space Empires box. So in a 4-inch box, I think I might be able to do it. Doug mentions that resin printers, which I have investigated a little bit, are much easier to dial in than FDM printers, which are the filament printers, but there's more steps between the file and the finished print. This is true. Also, you've got to worry about the rather toxic resin, liquid resin. You've got to worry about fumes, which is a concern with some types of filament, but not the stuff I'm using. And there's a lot more variables in there, but you could get much better detail, like an order of magnitude better detail with resin printers. And as Nerd Workshop points out, if you are doing miniatures, you really do want a resin printer. You'll just get way better results on a resin printer. I think you can get from talking to people who say, yeah, terrain you can usually get by with a filament printer, but for the miniatures themselves, you want the resin printer. Now, there's a reason I want the resin printer for the 3D 28 millimeter Traveler Starships, like the control consoles and stuff, all of which are in there. You're really going to want to print those in resin. Now, the good news is you can get a resin printer for like 150 bucks. So that's not something I plan to do soon because I don't have any of those things yet, and it's going to be a huge investment in time. It takes like 400 hours. I got new figures on this. It takes like 400 hours to print everything for that, and that's probably with 2 printers running. So I am using 4 Commands and Colors Napoleonics. They're not Planos, but they're very similar trays to Planos. And then each nationality gets one. That's a very bulky solution. Another thing is, so this is a thing. So let's say you have, I wish I had more of these in here now. Let's say you have something small like, here we go. So this was the attempt to be the half height counter tray, by the way, and this did not work at all because there's not enough flex in the uprights. So the lid's just really difficult to get on or off. But in any case, let's say you have something like this. This is the empty one, right? And you're printing it on a filament printer. Okay, so the printer's actually going to go around the outside a couple times, and then it's going to fill it in, zigzag back and forth, and then fill it in again, zigzag back and forth, and eventually you'll hit filler and where it only fills it in partially, but you're covering the whole layer. Whereas on a resin printer, you have a uh, a glass plate that a UV light shines through in certain places and hardens the entire layer at once. So for like big prints that take up a lot of the plate, um, the resin printers are going to be much faster, but they're not necessarily faster overall layer by layer. And as Doug mentions, you need to the UV light that cures the resin does not completely cure the resin. So once you pull it out of the resin, you got to put your hazmat gear on, take it out of the resin, wash it off, which there's special equipment for, and then you have to put it in a UV curing oven, which there's a special, or you can just wave a UV light over it. But boy, that sounds like a pain in the ass to get it to completely cure, or put it out in the sun, but then the sun can discolor it. So um, there's a lot. Well, this is a good point. This is true. There are no 37 hours. What is it at 31? It's 31 hours. But I'll tell you what, I can fit like 2,000 counters in that tray. Maybe not that many, but I could fit at least 1,100 counters in that tray. So, depending on how thick the counters are, right? And I actually did a survey of counter thickness. And interestingly, I forgot to check counter thicknesses on Second World War. But we'll eventually remember to do that. Another variable is how are you pulling the counters out of the tray, right? I mean, how do you want the pieces organized? This is more of a general topic than a 3D printed topic, which might be a relief for some people. How do you want to organize the pieces, right? Do you need to continually pull pieces out of the bin as you play, or is that something you do at the beginning and then you never touch the bin again? How to best optimize pieces for withdrawal later in the process versus withdrawal at the beginning of the process. Really, the key question to answer here is the question to answer is where is the counter you're looking for, right? And this is where I got stuck in Pacific War. And this is why it took me 3 hours to set up friggin' Guadalcanal when I was doing it a year ago before the new one came out. I guess that's more than a year ago now. But the well, I guess the resin's got a smell, from what I understand, and my wife is very sensitive to smells, and I occasionally get sensitive to it. Um, but um, the stack style counter trays allow you to instantly know, okay, instead of a GMT compartment that has 80 counters in it, potentially more, and then I got to pick through 80 counters to find the one that I'm looking for. I've got a stack of 8 to 12 counters. I know which stack it's in, so I pull it out, right? Um, Something like ASL, where you have a lot of identical counters, the consideration is a little different, right? So if you've got the 8666 American squads, well, they're all the same, right? There's identification letters on them, but that's just for bookkeeping purposes. So you don't really care about that. You just want a 666 American squad, right? And I actually completely intend to build an ASL travel kit with 3D printed stuff, by the way. That will totally work. Latex is a serious allergy issue for some people. Not aware that I'm allergic to it. Let me put it that way. The resin's also fairly expensive. Filament's pretty cheap. At the moment, until I start doing the 3D printed Traveler starships, the filament printer is sufficient for me. So I'm not going to work it out. Another game. Speaking of games, this is not going to work for. Federation and Empire. That box is basically solid counter sheets. I mean, the book's huge too, but there's a lot of counter sheets in there. And frankly, the counter sheets you get in the box are generally not enough to play the game with if you're serious about Fed and Empire. So I think, but even so, right? Something like this, you know, I might take up the same amount of space storing this many counters with one of those much bigger container store trays that's easily 2.5 times the size of this thing. So even if you don't end up with everything back in the box, it's potentially much more compact. Now, one of the things I'm going to experiment with is labels for the tops of these. Now, these aren't perfectly smooth, right? They're 3D printed, and even though this is the side that was on the glass, it is not perfectly smooth. I'm the masking tape sticks to it fine. I'm not sure label stock will, so I want to experiment with that a little bit. Um, yes, Doug, and I've watched some videos on people who printed it, and that this is basically what they did. They printed the whole plates and stuff like that on the filament printer, and did all the internal bits and bobs on the resin printer. Man, this just eats up so much space, man. If I had a compact collection, that I could keep like a rolling cart for Commands and Colors Napoleon. And there's people that do this, right? But they aren't people that have 450 war games, right? Or they have a much larger house than I do. I cannot burn that amount of space. Um, Interestingly, I think I'm reimagining storage for this office too, because right now there's actually RPG stuff on the top shelf, and right now it's just RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu, and then there's Traveler over here, which you've never seen. But the Traveler's probably going out in the other room. The RPG stuff's probably going in on this shelf right here, and then this shelf behind me will stay War Games, and then I'll try and come up with a better camera solution too, a better place to put the camera. I mean, you could always just use tape, right? I mean, that's possible. It just won't look as fancy. And I like fancy stuff, right? So, yeah, I mean, this is how I do how I do Commands and Colors, and it works. And this is basically how I do ASL, except I use trays that aren't planos and which are approximately a quarter the size of a plano, which in most cases is sufficient, right? Unless you've got like I got to sort all the red barricades Russians into the same compartment with the regular Russians, and I don't see any reason why anybody needs to do that. You only need them when playing red barricades. So, oh, I'm not going to do it super fancy. I've got a basic template for it, even if the labels work out. It's going to say the name of the game, and then there'll be a box for each compartment and a label in what's in the stack in the box. So I've spent enough time on the 3D modeling aspect of it. I do want to extend the whole thing, and at this point, I want to say the designs for all the half-inch counter stuffs are basically done. There's basically the idea is that this 48 tray, you're going to be able to fit 4 of these in a layer in a war game box, even if it's a smaller box um like an Avalon Hill box. And then there's a 24, which is half this size, and a 12, which is a quarter this size. So if you want, you can fill up an entire layer with 24 or 16 12 compartment trays, if that's a solution that makes sense for you. Or you can use 8 24 compartment trays, or 4 of these, or 2. They're not 96s because I squeezed an extra compartment in, or 2 of the 104s. So, and then there's a wide one too, which is called the 52, because it has 52 compartments, and it's basically 4 high and 13 across. And then that fits in a single layer too, and you can fit 5 of those in a single layer. So there's a bunch of different options that I have now. All the tray designs are finalized. That doesn't mean that I won't discover some design flaw because I did today on this tray with the British in it. In fact, I had miscalibrated the side uprights here, and fortunately, the print, which took 13 or 15 hours, was salvageable with the use of a little utility knife. But then I had to go fix the design as well. So this is possible, but I would really prefer to not. Because then I have to do that in the modeling step, or you could technically do it in the slicer with some slicing software too. That sounds like a pain in the nuts. I'm not going to do that. I'd rather make labels. Um, the, I mean, the considering the design, so these things print with you can't print in thin air is the basic message here. Okay. So this bottom side, which turns out to be the top when you get the whole thing together, is what's on the build plate. And then the additive process builds it up from there. Okay. So you could put little recessed letters in here, but I haven't actually experimented with that. And I'm not sure how well that will work. I think it will work if those recesses are about 0.5 millimeter, but I haven't tried doing that horizontally yet on the bottom. Alistair asks, if you run out of filament mid-print, are you hosed? Basically, yes. Uh, you just got to watch that. I have yet to run out of a roll of filament. The only filament I've run out of is the tiny spool of like 15 feet of white filament that they gave me with the printer. Even this black stuff, which I'm just this is a different brand than the rest of the stuff I'm using. This was, somebody bought me this for Christmas. I'm glad I got it, but it's been very flaky with pulling up off the bed and very aggravating to deal with. I had to throw away about a 10-hour print just the other day because it kept pulling off. Now, as Jason Williams points out, there's what's called a filament runout sensor, which means that if your filament breaks and stops feeding, or if it runs out, the printer will pause until somebody comes by and fixes that. I am not positive how that would work, how well that would work, because while loading the filament into the model I have, it's very hard to not move the print arm. So I'm not sure. That has not come up. That I'll figure that out. But there's an add-on that you can get that does that. There's a million add-ons you can get. Some of which you can just print, but many of which you can go buy. Some printers do have a runout sensor on board. Those are the ones that cost more than $250. So how do you estimate how much filament you'll need for a given job? So the spools are 1 kilogram, and for example, this 48 tray consumes 92 grams of filament. The slicer tells me that. And while it's probably not perfectly accurate, I have a pretty good idea, right? So I mean, I can keep an eye on it. I haven't printed anything so big that I'm going to use like a third of a spool of filament. The biggest tray that I'm using, which is the 104, uses 135 grams of filament for the bottom and then 56 for the top. So it's almost a fifth of a spool. So I got to keep that in mind, right? But I'm making stuff, and I got this bright red, and I got this Wavell khaki, and I got Blucher black, which I'll buy a different brand because this stuff sucks. And I'm about to, as of I think tonight, I'm going to switch over to the Bonaparte blue. So. Oh dear. All right, John, we're running over anyway. So we have, how much is a spool? The stuff I've been buying, which is the Inland Micro Center brand filament, is $18 a spool, just the regular PLA. Normally for PLA, which is the standard stuff, spools are going to cost somewhere between $15 and $25 with an average of about 20. So pretty much how it works. So, but it depends. It depends on the color, depends on the brand. Some brands are as much as $26 that I've seen. And I'm not talking about anything with like carbon fiber in it or anything. I'm just talking about plain PLA that's different colors. So yeah, so this is what sucks. And I have tossed some bigger. I haven't tossed the 104, fortunately, but I've tossed some bigger ones that just result in just total failures. Next, I'm probably going to move back to the 5/16, the 9/16 inch counters, because I want to get Third World War organized for Origins. And that's another game where the counters are currently stored outside the box. All right. We did about 20 minutes on random 3D print, probably 30 minutes on random 3D printing shit. But otherwise, we had a great discussion about classics that we should play but haven't played yet. So hopefully everybody had a good time. Tune in next week so tomorrow we got the show with Dan. Hopefully there will be an unboxing video this week. Tomorrow's show is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. So tune in for that. We may have a special guest depending on whether Dan has come through or not. And then next week, tune in here at 8 p.m. Eastern next Monday night for the Best of Avalon Hill Part 4. where we will be starting in 1984. And I may start skipping over the sports games, to be honest about it. So, everybody have a great night. Hopefully, everybody had a great time tonight. I certainly did. We will see everybody again soon.